Recording. Welcome, friends. It is week one, lecture two. So you are already, we're already doing it. We're already on our second lecture, which is awesome. It is October 25th. For some reason, I put November 25th. I think I put November 24th yesterday. I don't know why I did that, which is technically, I think, Thanksgiving. So sorry about that. If anybody caught that. Today I wrote November 25th, and I was like, wait a second, it's not Thanksgiving. What's going on? It's October 25th. Fun. A couple of little housekeeping things. Don't forget, you have discussion questions due Sunday, 11:59 p.m. That is in Pacific time. So if you're on East Coast time, you got a little bit longer. You get to like, I don't know, what is it, 2:59? 3:59? No, 2:59. Core assignments are also due by Sunday as well. One thing just to, again, reiterate is if you are late on a core assignment, that's okay. You're going to get, it's kind of okay every other week. You're going to get basically like a reach out and you get an official check-in. And if you're behind on those, then you can kind of put on probation. There's a whole bunch of stuff going that. But you can kind of make those up. If you just have a week from that's very stressful and that happens to people, then, you can just let me know and then I can advocate for you. The thing I can't do anything about is if you forget discussion questions. That you are on your own. I cannot, literally, I can't change it. I can't accept late ones. That's like a company policy. It's like our parent company's policy. So if you're going to do anything, just knock out your discussion questions. Like, please just knock them out. I hate when students, pass the exam, pass core assignments, don't do enough discussion questions and you have to retake. That's not fun. And it has happened, which is the worst. They're so easy. So make sure you please go do those. And you have 3 core assignments: predict destructuring, convert the arrow, and one more. Anybody remember what it is? Pop it up. Cool. Great. Talking about office hour, Garrett did a GitHub overview, which was awesome. He showed us how to kind of go on GitHub, how to post one of our assignments to GitHub. Again, that's really something that you should be doing. You should be posting to GitHub. It's what I would encourage you to do. Don't zip up your files, post them to GitHub. It will be better for you. I promise. All of those, we also talked about destructuring objects and arrays. And we talked about terminal basics. So it was actually a pretty heavy office hour. We normally won't go that heavy. Again, I like to give space if there is space needed for assignments or for you to work on something or come ask questions, but there were no questions, so we just kind of filled it with some information. Just so you know, all of those will be here. And so when we are, if you're wondering where those videos are, the videos can be found. These are going to be hyperlinks. I didn't record yesterday's meet and greet because it was a meet and greet. And so I didn't feel like it needed to be recorded. But the class was here. So like, this is our class lecture. It can also be found on the lectures portion. So if you go to our MERN lectures, go to day 1, it's also right here. So if you are wondering where the lectures are, you can find them there and you can find them here. Office hours will not be on the platform. They're going to just be here, but I will break them down. Like I took 3 different videos so that way we could kind of segment them. So that way, if you guys wanted to look at the terminal basics, you didn't have to kind of scrub through a video or anything like that. So I'll post those there tonight so that way you have access to them. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to do a little bit of a recap yesterday, a super light one because yesterday was fairly light. We're going to talk about arrow and anonymous functions today, ternaries, and then really ternaries we're going to kind of just hit on, but really we're going to really talk about this React and single page applications. We're going to create our first Vite application or project. And so we're going to do that together. We're going to walk through that process so that way everybody knows how to do it and make sure. And we're going to kind of look and dive into what are the files that's created when we use Vite. And there's another way, create React app or CRA is what I think it says on the platform. That's another way to do it. I would really encourage Vite. But if you wanted to do CRA, I guess it's kind of up to you. But I would encourage Vite. So that's what we're going to do today. Again, we kind of had a recap of yesterday. We talked about what is a full stack application, and we showed the kind of main areas. We had our client or our front end. we have our backend or our server, and then we had our database. And we talked about how we can, does anybody remember what is the cycle that we talked about? It's like 2 words. Anybody remember the type of cycle that we talked about?
Request response.
Exactly, Joseph. We talked about the request and response cycle. That's going to be a big thing. We're going to start, we're going to use tools to make requests. In our code, we're going to say like rec dot whatever. And then we're going to get a response. We're going to have to do something with that. So I want to make sure you guys know request and response cycle is just us asking or sending information to one end and it giving us some sort of response back. We also talked about just a JavaScript recap. We talked very, very high level on kind of the primitive data types, which are strings, numbers, and Booleans. And then we talked about the composite data types of arrays and objects. We did in office hour talk about destructuring objects and destructuring arrays. And so that was recorded. And then the code here, you'll have access to this after this class. That code will be there and we kind of walk through if we wanted to get multiple values within an array or just one value or kind of why we do it and how we do that with an object as well. So if you missed that or you don't know how to destructure, we also talked about the spread and the rest operators. All of this information, just want to continue to show that all of this can be found here. Destructuring, what is destructuring? We use these examples just to kind of walk through these and explain that. And then we also talked about rest and spread operators here. So you can kind of look at that. If you want a more in-depth look about what they are, you can go here and you can watch the video and get some practice there. Great. Any questions before we jump into class? Anything we need? Okay. Great. Well, let's jump in. We have a couple different things I want to talk about. I have some code already pre-written, but does anybody remember how to declare a function in JavaScript? Function declarations. Anybody remember how to do that? What's the key word to tell JavaScript, hey, I need a function? Yep, exactly, Brittany. I'm going to say something like function. This is a one-line function. No, this is too much. So I have a function called greet. Right, that's its name. I've got a parameter. We're going to say first name. I'm not going to give it some sort of base value. It takes in a first name, or it takes in 2 values. I'm going to call the first one first name and last name. And then here, let's say I just want a console.log hello plus first name plus last name. Perfect. This is just a base function, right? It's, again, if I run this, nothing happens. Anybody know why this didn't work? What do I got to do? What does a function need? Yeah, I got to call the function. So here I'm calling my function. And then here, the way we call the function is we give the function name. And then if the function needs parameters, right, then we can pass them in. Now, when it had this equal sign, can anybody remember what this is called? Like if it said John or Jane. So, does anybody know what this value is called?
Hard coding?
Not hard coding. This is a default parameter. And so within functions, we can do a couple different things, right? We can expect our client or our user or whatever's using the function, right, to pass in the correct information or set up a way that, you know, they have to pass in the right information. We make it a required field within our form, you know, kind of X, Y, or Z. We can also set it up to what we call a default parameter, meaning that, hey, if they just call greet, if for some reason we call greet, but we don't pass any values, that's okay. Then I want you to default to here. Default to using these. So if I run this, so let's say I run this, I'm going to get hello, Jane Doe. I didn't pass in any values, but so it gives me this. Now, let's say that our clients are good and they do pass in some values. Then I can say something like John, let's say Wick, because those movies are sweet. I'm a big Keanu Reeves fan. Not a great actor, but the dude rips. He's pretty cool. So if I do pass in values, what we need, we can see that it says hello, John Wick. So these values, when our function is called, will always take precedence over a default value. Always, right? But this is just a way that, let's say that there's some piece of information, or, you know, if I didn't have these and I just passed in John, well, my function needs two values, right? Or else it's going to give me, I think it's going to give me like John and null or undefined. Yeah. Because it's saying like, hey, this is, you're using these values, but, or you're calling this, but I don't have a value for it. So it's undefined. And then it can break our code, right? And so what I can do is do a default parameter. So that way we're, you know, it's always going to supersede the default value. But let's say our user doesn't do it, or they bypass a way that our form messes up and doesn't pass the correct information. At least we have something as a backup. Most functions that you deal with, like if you're working with an API, if you're working with other values or really other things, I mean, even down to the granular level of JavaScript, there's gonna be a lot of default values. So that's something that if you're working with APIs, that's something to be aware of, is what is our default value that it's giving us. Because again, you don't really want to trust people. Regardless, you just kind of want to make sure, okay, here's my default value. And then if somebody needs to go in and change it, they can. But for what we're doing, you don't really need to do that. Just wanted to kind of let you guys know that that's what default value. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Just put a 1 in the chat. That makes sense. Cool. Sorry, I minimize your photos, so that way it doesn't show up and on the recording, you know, none of my code is blocked. So that way, if you guys are walking through it, but it makes it to where if you do have your camera on or anything, I can't see anything. So, you know, I want to make sure that you guys can hear me. Great. So again, really the bare bones of this is that we have this keyword of function. We have our function name, and then we have some parameters. Now, again, functions don't always have to have parameters. They can be empty, which means that they can run if you don't give it any information. And then we just have some sort of value in between. Now, this is what we call a function declaration. This is sort of your base function. Now, with ES6, there's what we call, there's two other types. The first one is called an anonymous function. And so what that is we're creating a variable. This is all what we call syntactic sugar. It operates the same way. And if you really look at how it works, like under the hood, it really is doing this. But it makes it a little bit easier to view, easier to see, and to write. So here we have say hello equals, and then we have function. So it's still have our keyword, but you notice we don't have a name. Anonymous means that we're not going to give it a name. And you might kind of think, well, like, we're kind of giving it a name here. Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair statement. But you don't have a name. It's anonymous, right? It doesn't have a name. Still follow the curly brackets, and then you've got your console log hello. So same way, I can just say hello. It's my function call, right? But now I'm calling this variable whose value is a function, and it will run this function whenever this is called. So now if I run this, we get hello. That's what we call an anonymous function. Again, under the hood, does the same thing. Now you're going to see a lot of this next value or this next type within JavaScript. And this is what we call an arrow function. So we kind of take it even further. We've already gotten rid of the name, and we just had the word function and parentheses. Now we're going even further and saying, you know what, forget the keyword of function. We don't even need that anymore. We're just going to say hello equals, and we have our bracket, or sorry, our parentheses. If we have a parameter, let's say we have first name, last name, We just put that in here. Something like that. Then we do the equal sign and the arrow. And then what do we want to do? We want to console log hello. So this is now, instead of doing an anonymous function, we're doing an arrow function. These are really popular in React. Again, they're doing the same thing. So it's not anything that's like there's very high level things that it's, or like maybe low level things that it's doing that are different. Do you need to know those right now? No, right? They're just think about it as you're creating another function. But it doesn't have the keyword function. It just uses this arrow. And when you use that arrow, JavaScript knows, okay, this is an arrow function. In the same way, I can do say hello, and I will console log hello. Perfect. Now, there are some good qualities with arrow functions that we like, especially from a writing perspective, making it easier to understand, writing less lines of code, et cetera, et cetera. To where if we've got right here, we just kind of have one line, right? We have this say hello, this is an arrow function, we have this curly bracket, and then all we're doing is console logging hello. That's it. That's all we're doing. So if we're doing that and we just have one, it's just what we call a one-line function. There's only one line associated to it. We actually don't need the curly brackets, and we can just do it in one line. So we say something like this. Say hello, parenthesis. And again, if I had a parameter, it would go in that parenthesis. I've got my arrow. And then what do I want it to do? Notice I don't have to do a curly bracket because it's just implying there's only one thing, right? There's only one line here. This is what we call a one-line function or a one-line arrow function. I also want to point out that all of this is, most of this is here, right? Where we talk about the function of keyword or the function keyword. We talk about anonymous functions, one-line functions. So let's say that I wanted to do hello name. I could do a backtick here. And then I do, if I want to put in a variable or a value, then all I have to do is I do a backtick. This is the same key as your tilde. So it's on the top left of your keyboard. And you say, so that says, hey, get ready, because within my string, I want to call a value. This is my favorite way if we're sort of dealing with string concatenation or adding something in to a string. I believe it's called string template literal. That if instead of saying like hello plus first name, you having to deal with the kind of like adding like this, instead of having to do something like this, we can do this backtick. Again, that's the key on the top left, right, with the squiggly subtraction sign called a tilde. So it's that key. And then before we talk about our variable, or before, to tell it, hey, this is the variable I'm calling, we put a $sign and a curly bracket around the variable name. And so what it will do is it will then just inject that variable into my string. So that being said, I could say something like first name, right? I have my function, it's taking in a parameter. Then it's just going to console log hello first name. So when I say hello, I add in a first name. And I run it, and it says, hello, John. What I like about this is I can then, if I wanted to say, how are you? Instead of having to, again, say plus another string, how are you, and dealing with the spacing, I can just write it like I would normally write. And so for me, it's much, much faster. Perfect. Hello, John, how are you? Now, what's nice about it is if I just have one parameter as well, actually don't even need the parentheses. Now, if you have multiple parameters, you need the parenthesis. But if you just have one parameter that you're dealing with your arrow function, you don't need the parenthesis as well. So you can see that we're sort of just diminishing or decreasing the amount of things we have to do with our code. So instead of going from something like this, we're just doing it all in one line, and it's a little bit easier to write. And then hopefully eventually, as you see this quite a bit, it becomes easier to understand as well. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions on arrow functions so far? Okie doke. What another benefit that arrow functions give us is we can do what we call a one-line return. So if we were to say something like this with an anonymous function, so we say hello function, return the string hello, right? Here I have this, first I have this function keyword, and then I have this return keyword. With an arrow function, the whole idea is it's syntactic sugar. It makes it look easier. It's easier to write. Is it has what we call an implied return. So if we just have a one-liner, I don't need to write the keyword of return. Now, if you have multiple lines, you have to have the curly brackets, and then there's things you could do with like a parentheses. But if I just have one line, I can say hello. It takes in no values, and all it's going to do is return hello. So if I were to say console log hello, because I'm returning, I'm not console logging, so I have to console log the value of the function. And remember, the function call becomes whatever the function returns. And so this is an implied return of hello, so it should just console log hello. So all of those, again, if you used an anonymous function or used a function declaration, they're all going to work the same, right? And even this anonymous function and this arrow function, if you look down kind of at the granular level, it's going to use this kind of technology, this format, to actually run a function, right? It's part of the function class. And so it's going to do that. But this is just a lot easier way for us to write it. So instead of having to do all of that stuff, I can just do this right here. And it does all of the same thing, just makes our code easier to read and to understand. Now you might look at yourself and say, well, it is not easier to understand because right now I'm very confused, and that's okay. Because this is going to be something that you practice and something you get to. We will use arrow functions a lot when we start getting into our requests and our responses to different APIs or to our different servers. That's where they really are going to shine and be much easier to mess with and understand and kind of follow through there. But it, again, if you use right now, if you use like an anonymous function for what we're doing, that's okay. If you use a normal function declaration, that's okay. But I would encourage you to start practicing your arrow functions. And I think one of your assignments is convert to arrow, to where you're going to take these values in here. So these guys, like these on clicks and this alert, take these from an anonymous function, and then you are going to make these all arrow functions. Same thing here. So if we're just doing one line, remember, we could just do a function, an arrow function, a one-liner that has an implied return, so you don't even need the return keyword. So that's what this assignment is these guys right here creating or converting all of them to arrow functions. Okay. Any questions on that? Any questions on your assignment? Any questions on arrow functions? Just put a 1 in the chat if arrow functions make the most sense to you ever. So somebody asked, could you cover the context when it comes to arrow functions? Do you mean like when we're going to use them? Johnny, great question, but do you mean when we're going to use them? Or sorry, I'm not quite following your question. Context on the platform. Oh, this guy. Fancy syntax isn't the only change. Yeah, when we get to that point, we can handle that. Yeah, because we're gonna have to do some sort of like for each. We're gonna do map and filter, and when we kind of get to that, we can talk about that for sure. But yeah, I will make sure I cover that. Great question. Cool. Anybody else have any other questions on arrow functions before we jump? We're gonna jump kind of into React. Or actually we'll hit on the ternary operator really quickly. And then we're gonna jump into single page applications in React and Vite. So any other questions on arrow functions? Okay, great. Moving on, let's go to our ternary operator. These are all in the same way that for right now, you can think of arrow functions as syntactic sugar. Ternary operators are just basically an if-else statement, a very basic if-else statement that you can do, and it just makes it look nicer. It acts the same way as an if-else statement. It just makes it look much nicer. So the way that it works is, if I've got this sort of this if-else statement here, let's say that I've got this arrow function of can afford, it takes in two values. I've got an arrow function. I have an if the item price is greater than account balance, then we're going to return cannot afford. You're X amount short, else return can afford. So let's just take this code. Okay. Oh, it's an image. That's why. For a ternary operator, this works just fine. Right? Again, this is just fine. This works a-okay. All a ternary operator does is instead of using these keywords of if and else, what it does is it uses a couple different kind of key things. Let me get my annotation tool. Instead of saying if, we just put our, is this we're going to return, and then we first put our condition here. So in the same way that we said if, and then we put our condition, we start with our condition, right? So you can kind of forget this return for right now. For a ternary, we're turning this if else into a ternary operator. We put our condition first, then we put a question mark. And this tells our computer, hey, this is a ternary operator. This is sort of an if else, it's a conditional statement. The first thing after the question mark is what happens if it's true. So here we have our if else, if this is true, then I want to say cannot afford, your X amount short. So it does the same thing. It says, okay, if this is true, so we have our question mark, the first thing is true. This is what I want you to do. Else is our colon, and then you put can afford, right? So we're returning can afford. This return, we just have to have one return statement instead of two. So that's where a ternary operator can come in handy. So instead of having to write return twice. But again, all you do in a ternary operator is you do your, cancel my things. So if I were to say something like ternary operator, so again, it's just a shorthand if else statement. Oh, stupid. So all I have to have is the condition. I do my question mark. And then I have my true expression. Or what do I want to do if it's true? And then I have my false expression. So I have the condition. And on the platform, it showed, hey, if the item price is greater than account balance, that's my condition. And if that is true, if item price is greater than my account balance, then I do my true expression, which I think it said like, console log cannot afford. Else, separated by this colon, and then my false expression, where this condition is not true, false expression. Now, one thing I want to note is if you've got like an if else, if you have multiple conditions, not just if else, or sorry, else if. So if you have an if, an else if, an else if, and an else, ternary operators do not work. They're just binary. You can only do it if it's one or the other, right? And so if you have this condition, and then let's say you had multiple things like, hey, if it's not that much short, or check to have a coupon, like stuff like that, then you want to just stick with the normal condition. chain, condition chain. But if you just have two, if it's just a normal if else, you can use this ternary operator. This is all optional. This ternary operator portion is optional. It can make your code look a lot cleaner, a lot easier. You have to use less code, so less return statements. And you have less lines of code, which is nice. And I would encourage you guys to kind of practice this and see if you like it. But if you are sort of, not comfortable with it yet and you want to use an if else, that's okay. I usually, honestly, I use if else or typically, not, I don't, but it doesn't, it's not like it's like from the granular level, it doesn't like speed up your code or anything per se. Just as another way, again, syntactic sugar, another way we can write something to make it a little bit nicer, a little bit easier, a little bit more shorthand. Any questions on ternary operators? You can nest them, but like it says, I would not nest ternary operators. It can get a little bit confusing. So usually if you're trying to do something like that, you're like, what is going on? It's nicer just to use a normal conditional statement. Any questions on ternary operators? Okie doke. Oh, you guys are super quiet today. I'd say okay. We're moving on into, you've got functional programming. You have this idea of like a multi-paradigm portion. We're going to talk about callback functions, map and filter tomorrow, along with props. So that's what we will be talking about tomorrow. I do want to move forward a little bit, though. We're not really talking about the node package manager. We are a little bit, but I would encourage you guys to read this just to kind of understand. You want to make sure that you have NodeMon installed. This is a little bit easier when we're running our actual code. It's a little bit easier for us to, instead of having to redo our server every time it dies, which we'll get to later on. So I'll kind of come back to this. You can just have NodeMon installed globally. That's what this -G does, is it says npm install -G. So saying wherever I'm at, I want to go ahead and install NodeMon. So that way for multiple projects, I can use it. And you say NodeMon, and then it allows us to have our server kind of redo itself every time we save, just to make sure it continues to run until it breaks. I want to get into React and kind of talk about, this is that word syntactic sugar that I keep saying. We're going to talk a little bit about building our first one. We'll come back a little bit more tomorrow with that. But from a high level, I want to talk about what is React, why we use React, what a single page application is, and kind of where it became popular. Does anybody know what company created React? It's a famous company I can guarantee almost, if not all of you have heard of. I would assume everybody's heard of it. Yeah, exactly. Both answers are true. Facebook, Meta, not MySpace, though. Tom was really the G. He just took like 300 million and then dipped off the face of the earth. So that was, he's the best. I think he's got it really into photography. Dude's living his best life. But no, it's not from MySpace. It's from Meta and Facebook, right? Facebook at the time, now Meta. But they created this because they wanted a way for their entire platform to reload faster, right? They wanted a way for, basically there's a lot going on in Facebook. And if you guys are part of Facebook, but again, a probability perspective, you probably are. There's a lot of things going on with the marketplace, with the friends. There's a whole bunch of code. You can keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And they wanted a way for it to, instead of having to redo everything and having to kind of load all the stuff, if you're just clicking on one button, you don't want to have to reload everything. You just want to change one portion. And so they created React and then made it available, I think in 2013 to everybody as a front-end library Some people say that there's like an argument, but if it's a framework or it's a library, I believe it's just a library. It's definitely not a framework. I think you'll be shunned if you say framework. But a library is just tools that you can use. It's just a bunch of code that somebody else has really already built that you can then access and use. So you can think about it like a pre-built everything, which is really, really nice, right? So it means we have tools that we can do. It has certain things that it can accomplish. There are a million JavaScript libraries out there, and the joke is that like every day a new JavaScript library is born. But React is really the king right now. There's a few that are kind of high up there. Angular has made a way back a little bit. There was Vue and Svelte, but really React is the one that most companies use. Most developers in the front end are going to use React, and this is just a front end library. So that's one thing I want to communicate. If you really love React, that's awesome, but it's a little bit more front end. You still communicate to the back end, so you have to have some knowledge there. But it is a front end library, right? So what our user is currently saying, which is cool. But it's what we call a single page application. And so from a high level, what a single page application is if we're looking at this, what used to happen, and if you guys have already taken, if you've already taken Python and you've already taken Java, or even in web fundamentals, what typically happened is if you clicked on a button or you did something different, what happened is, when it refreshed or when you added in like on click, I want this picture to change, it reloaded everything. Right? Even if you had a whole bunch of this information, right, or a whole bunch of this code or a p tag or whatever, and you just wanted that one image to change, it had to reload the entire document. If you guys remember, you can inspect, and these are just documents. So this whole thing is a doc type HTML. This is all just a document, right? And so what would happen is Facebook realized like, hey, every time we want to change something on this page, the entire document has to reload. And so what they did is they utilized a single page application, meaning that you just have one document file. You're not continuously reloading it. But if we think about it, what really is happening is I've got this, let's say I've got this portion here. I've got this portion here. Oops. Okay, I've got this portion here. Maybe I've got this portion here. And I've got this portion here, right? So what a single page application did is it broke those up into what we call components. So now it's not that everything is just attached to kind of one main train sort of thing, but you broke it up in like different train cars, right? Or different sort of pieces. So that way, if I wanted to, like for instance, even in here, if I wanted to go from unit to assignment checklist, well, this was, I guess, a bigger change. But if I'm coming from here to here, right? This whole portion, we could even change this, but this whole portion here doesn't necessarily need to change, right? This does not need to change. They are, oh, that's what it was. They are staying the same. And so the only thing that's changing is this guy and this guy. And so what it does is allows us to keep the same document, right? And just swap out what we call the components, and just swap them out. So you're not reloading. If you had a bunch of different code and I was, let's say that I was scrolling or doing something here, right? And I clicked on an image here that was going to reveal an answer. I don't need to reload all this information and all this above information. I don't need to reload all that because that just takes time and it doesn't have such a great user experience. So that's like a practical idea. Let's actually just build one out. What a single page application does is allows us to have, what's in the name, a single page, a single HTML page, right? One document. And then again, it allows us to build out a bunch of different components. So if we're trying to redo that Coding Dojo thing, we have maybe a component here. I've got a component here. Got a component maybe here. Component here. And then maybe like I've got a big component here. Whatever. Well, if I want to change this, what I can then do is, and I wanted to, make it look different. I have all these components here. What I can do is instead of having to reload everything, I can actually just swap out my components. And just take that and then do that. Right? Everything stayed the same. Right? This didn't need to, let's say hypothetically, this didn't need to change. 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 The only portion that changed was this last piece. Instead of, again, me having to reload everything, I can just swap it out. If I want to go back to this, then I swap it out. Let's say that I wanted to add this portion here. I could leave this, move that out. Maybe I have something like this and this, right? I can just swap things in and out. It's us affecting what we call the DOM, which is our document object model, which is our document. By creating it, creates what we call a virtual DOM. So it creates a virtual DOM, then it checks back and forth and says, is there a change? And if it does, then it shows that and pushes that change to the DOM. That way we can visualize and see that. I know that that's a little bit more theory, but that's really the power behind a single page application. We are modularizing our code, right? We are taking apart our web application and we're breaking it into components. React is going to be nothing but components, right? And you can sort of think about it like Lego pieces that we can just swap in and out, and it makes it much, much faster. Imagine if every single time you were building something with a Lego and let's say you were building, I don't know, like a cabin, and then you had some trees and you had a lake and you had, bushes and a whole bunch of trees, right? And I wanted to change the actual cabin. Well, I wouldn't break everything apart and then rebuild all the trees again and rebuild the lake and rebuild the bushes and rebuild the house. I would just take off the house and put a new house on there, right? Same sort of things happening. I don't have to continue to reload the same thing over and over and over again. Okay, that was a lot of theory. Are there any questions, or does that make sense to you guys? Any idea about single page applications? Couple ones. Perfect. Great. Awesome. Let me clear my drawings. So there's a couple different ways that we can do that. So React allows us to do that. There's other tools that do SPAs or single page applications. Just React is the most popular. And we're going to create our first React app, right? So that's kind of one of your practice assignments, is to create your first React assignment. Now, there's two ways that we can create a React application. This is us creating it, kind of hard coding it. And this is us actually affecting the DOM by react.dom.render. We're not going to do this. This is an assignment that I would say if you didn't do it, it's okay. Read through it, but it's okay, because you're never going to use react.dom.render. That's not what we're going to do. There's two ways that we can do this. We can do the CRA, which stands for Create React App. This is sort of our antiquated way that we can do this, but it is available, but it's not maintained anymore. And so that's why, as Coding Dojo, recently it stopped being maintained, meaning that if there's an error, or, if you're on on an Apple computer, the new M3 is probably coming out like in 5 days or something, and there's new operating systems. If it doesn't work with it, and if it's no longer being maintained, then it's just going to be broken, right? Windows is starting to come out with their own chips in the same way Apple did. And so you don't really want to use tools that are no longer maintained, because though it might work now, it's not going to work in the future as things change, evolve, and shift, right? And so you can use either. I will be using Vite, but you can use either. Again, this is what I've always used. up until recently. And so if you wanted to use it, that's a-okay. I would suggest, I don't even know why we put it on there transparently. We should just use Vite here. So we are going to create our first application together. Now you have to have Node installed, so please make sure you have Node installed. But what we want to do is we're going to create our first Vite project, and then we're going to look at what it gives us and kind of look through that just a little bit for the next 11 minutes. Okay, so we're just going to follow this. I'm going to come in my terminal. Now, we talked all about the terminal. So if you're not familiar with the terminal, I would really encourage you in office hour. We talked about it, so I'll make sure that there's a video. So please make sure that you watch that. So give me 1 second. Okay. I just removed that folder of first Vite, so that way we can do it together. Okay. So first, what you want to do is you want to go in your terminal, and you can do this either in VS Code or in your terminal or command prompt. I would encourage you to do it this way. Get used to it. It's hard and not as fun at the beginning, but it's going to be a tool that you really, really need. And so all we're going to do is we're going to navigate to where we want our folder to be. So this says we should create a folder to hold applications created for following along. So right now I'm just going to do it in my week 1 folder, but just be aware of where you're creating this. Don't do it at the highest level because that can get kind of confusing. Make sure you're either in, a MERN or JavaScript folder. Maybe you want to do it there. You want to follow sort of my lead and have like week 1, week 2, week 3, where you're going to have all your assignments sort of thing. So you want to be in that. And then what you're going to run is npm create Vite at latest. So I'm here and I'm going to say npm create Vite at latest. Perfect. Now, what it's going to ask me is, what do you want your project name to be? This can be anything. So usually for an assignment, this is where I would encourage you guys to do the assignment name. On the platform, it says to do first Vite. So I'm just going to do that. Perfect. Now it's going to ask me to select a framework. So I use the arrow keys and then return to submit. Now I'm going to go down to React, to where React is underlined, highlighted, get the little arrow pointing at it. Again, see, you can use like Svelte or Preact or Vue, but we're going to use React because that's what this entire course is about, and it's king. So we click that, and then we're going to scroll down to JavaScript plus SWC. Great. So now it has created scaffolding of our project, and it tells you the pathway of where it's at. So within my week 1, I've got first Vite. If I say ls to view it, I see this folder. And now what it tells me to do is I need to cd into first Vite. I'm going to open this up and I want to see what is it. This has already created a lot of stuff for us. So let's see what it's created. Okay. Loading it up. And we have all of these files that eventually we're going to get really familiar with, like our source and our public. We're going to get familiar with all this fun stuff tomorrow, really. But I kind of want to walk through, here's what we're seeing, right? Our source, this app.jsx, we're not working in HTML files here. We're going to be working in JSX. And there's a great sort of lesson here on JSX and Babel. Really what Babel does is it converts our React language into HTML for the DOM, right? HTML and JavaScript for the DOM. And so it's a transpiler that will turn the JSX into JavaScript that browsers can understand, so we can actually put elements into our DOM, right? Into our actual document, HTML elements. We can put all kinds of different stuff in there. We can call JavaScript stuff. And so this is what it's doing. It's a great, I would encourage reading through this because it'll tell you a lot more. And it has like some JSX in depth, but that's what we're doing is we're going to be working in JSX. And you can see the nice thing is by doing it in JSX, it allows you to, you really are doing everything, and it looks just like HTML. Again, it's going to convert it for us. So you can, for all intents and purposes, you should do normal HTML here. Just know that it always has to have one parent element, and it cannot have a sibling. So I can't have like every component or every JSX cannot have siblings here. It's got to have just one thing. So if I did something like this, that would cause, you can see that's already caused such an issue. But we'll keep talking about this. The main thing we're going to talk through kind of all of these things. Is the main thing I want to talk about is it gives us this package JSON. So here you can see that I've got a ton of different dependencies and things that we need to download for this to work, right? Right now, we don't have any of them downloaded, and I can tell because if I did, there's going to be a folder called node modules. So Vite tells us what to do. That's not Vite. Vite tells us what to do. We have CD'd into first Vite. We've already done that. Now we need to run npm install. So npm install. I run that. And what it's doing, what npm install does is it goes to my package JSON. It says, okay, what are the dependencies you're saying that I need, right? So it goes into this file, it grabs all of these dependencies and it downloads them for me. Now we can see that I've got a new folder here called node modules. And it's all of this stuff. So I know that there were some questions on Discord about why is my folder so big? It's all of this information that we've downloaded. It's a whole bunch of different files, right? This is your node modules. Now, one thing to note is we have access, or sorry, now that we do npm install, we have these node modules. When you're going to submit an assignment, we need you to remove those because it's too much. So all you can do is say rm space -rf and then node modules. And then now if I say ls, you see that it no longer is there. But because we have npm install and our package JSON is still there, we don't delete this file for sure. Anytime if Garrett and I are going to grade an assignment, anything like that, as long as your node modules are deleted, we can come in. If let's say we have your assignment, we just run npm install. That's going to go into your package JSON file and it's going to download everything. And then we can just access them there. So even if you're wanting to save space on your computer, you can just delete your node modules. And anytime you want to go back to an assignment and work on it, you just run npm install, super easy. And then it'll grab your node modules for you. Now, the last thing it says to do is to run npm run dev. And this is also on the platform too. So if you guys are wondering, it kind of talks you through it and then you run dev. And then what it will do is, let's run that, npm run dev. And this is my server. So this is my front end, my client side server, which is awesome. And it's at localhost 5173. So I can come here and I can say localhost 5173. And this is my actual folder or my file that I was dealing with, right? So even if I come here, I say, let's find. And I see this, I have now manipulated my new Vite React file to add in plus will, right? So this is what we just created. It's all of this code right here. It's what is visualizing and showing all of this. So congratulations, if you guys are following along, you have officially created your first React file with Vite. And that's something that we're going to edit and we're going to usually get rid of all this junk in here. But again, we have now created our first React application with Vite. And so we can show that here. And then now, if we ever want to get out of it, we just do Control-C. And then now our server is dead. So if I were to refresh this, can't be reached because there's no server. But anytime I want to run it again, I just say run dev. And we're back. Okay. We've got 2 minutes until the end of class. Are there any questions on us setting up this first application? We're going to continue to look through as we go as we go through this, we're going to look through the source, the public. We're going to look through this index.html. We're going to keep talking about all this. And really tomorrow, we're going to talk a lot more about it. Keep opening up that sort of shell of what is going on under the root of things. But are there any questions on what we've done today, whether it be anonymous functions, arrow functions, single page applications, or creating our first Vite introduction / project? How are you guys feeling about React in general? Is it easier? Do you like JavaScript?
I'm curious about the difference between like source and public. I come from the Python stack, so seeing how that Flask app is organized versus this is going to be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna keep diving in and manipulating these and manipulating our public. In our index.html, it's kind of like we do have an HTML file. Technically, what we're doing is this is the HTML file, and then we just have one div called root. That if you go into our app.jsx, if you jump into it, we found it. Should just be our app. Then we manipulate the actual root there, and so we just are grabbing that information and just manipulating that, which is kind of fun. So it's all though it just says this under the hood, what we're doing is we just really, this is our React project. This is our HTML, but this is what everything we do is just coupled in this div ID of root. Yeah, right here. Like you create React app does a little bit different. But this is where creating a root. So if I said, remember how I said in that first, create your first React assignment, I would read through it. I don't know that you need to do it, but really what it's doing is we're just doing that. Get element by ID, and we're rendering our app. Our app is this guy right here, and we're rendering it right there. So that's kind of how it all works. But that's high level. We're going to keep diving in and kind of peeling back the different portions of that. We are going to continue to, so tomorrow, what we'll be doing is jumping into props. And so we're going to kind of start building in our first JSX tomorrow. We'll probably in office hour talk about map and filter and callback functions. Again, all of that will absolutely be recorded. But really tomorrow, so that way you guys can do the assignment, we got to get into functional components. And then we got to get into props. And so that's what we'll be doing is we'll be really starting to manipulate our first JSX folder or file, sorry. Passing in some information and then showing kind of what to do with it, which will be fun. We're kind of, this is where, and I just want to acknowledge this. This ramps up really quickly. And so if you're feeling any sort of overwhelmed, if you're feeling any sort of like, oh my gosh, this is like, we're going so fast. That's very normal. It usually levels out once we get to kind of like week, if we look at our calendar. Normally it levels out sort of like we're here, we do more map and filter, to-do list. This is a hard assignment, just gonna be blunt. This is like the hardest assignment in the entire course. And then here we kind of, it gets a little bit easier. And what's nice is you guys have a break week. And so we're not going to be talking about MongoDB. So you guys can keep kind of catching up. And then we get into MongoDB, and here's where it kind of starts getting easier. And then we'll start doing full stack. But the nice thing is that we have an entire week of full stack stuff to where I use this as we'll likely get started here with our lecture. We're going to build like a belt prep. So we'll build out a full, I'm going to make it, emulate it similar to like a belt exam. But we have basically 4 days for us to really dive in and make sure everybody understands everything they need. And then your first exam will open up here. So we got plenty of time. Does ramp up, but really week 5 and week 6 is where it kind of, whew, okay, we've learned all the stuff. Let's just put it all together. So any other questions, my friends? Okay. Don't forget about your convert to arrow assignment. These are all just, it's not due tonight. It's just a, what we'd encourage if you're keeping up, but that's okay. That, and then we'll talk about props tomorrow. So you can do prop it up. I will, once class is done, it takes about an hour to kind of, there's a multiple videos. So I gotta upload them all to YouTube and put them all and link them all. So give me about an hour and a half. And then I will have all that up here for you. So are there any other questions before I stop the recording? Okie doke. Well, I hope you guys have a great night.